The first story, The Haunting at Elm Street Bistro. Elm Street Bistro had always been a charming place, known for its exquisite cuisine and vintage ambience. Nestled in the heart of the old town, the restaurant was a favorite among locals and tourists alike. But beneath its charming exterior, the bistro held a dark secret. It all started one stormy night when the new owner, Lydia, decided to stay late to finalize some paperwork. The wind howled outside, and the rain lashed against the windows as she worked alone in the dimly lit office at the back of the restaurant. Around midnight, Lydia heard faint whispers and the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty dining area. Assuming it was just the wind playing tricks, she tried to ignore it. But the noises grew louder and more persistent. It sounded like a woman's voice, softly singing an eerie lullaby. Curiosity got the better of her, and Lydia decided to investigate. She walked through the darkened hallway, her footsteps barely audible on the polished wooden floor. As she entered the dining area, she was met with an icy chill that made her skin crawl. The room was empty, but the singing continued. Lydia followed the sound to a corner where an antique mirror hung on the wall. The mirror was an old relic, rumored to have been part of the original structure from the 1800s. As she got closer, the reflection in the mirror began to change. Instead of her own face, Lydia saw the image of a young woman in a tattered dress, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. The woman's lips moved, mouthing the words of the haunting lullaby. Lydia's heart raced as she tried to look away, but she was inexplicably drawn to the ghostly figure. The woman in the mirror raised a hand and pointed towards the kitchen. Terrified but compelled, Lydia made her way to the kitchen. The room was dark, with only the faint glow of the emergency exit sign casting eerie shadows. As she entered, she noticed the air was thick with the scent of lavender, an odd contrast to the usual smells of cooking. In the center of the kitchen stood a large wooden table, its surface scarred from years of use. On the table lay an old, dusty cookbook, open to a page with a handwritten recipe. The handwriting was delicate, almost childlike. Beneath the recipe, there was a name, Eliza. A cold breeze swept through the room, and Lydia felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly to see the ghostly figure of Eliza standing there, her expression one of deep sadness. Eliza's story began to unravel in Lydia's mind. She was a young chef who had worked at the bistro over a century ago. Accused of poisoning a patron, Eliza had been shunned by the community and died under mysterious circumstances. Lydia felt a wave of empathy for Eliza's tortured soul. Determined to help, she spent the next few days researching Eliza's story and discovered that the poisoning was a tragic accident, not a malicious act. Armed with this knowledge, Lydia held a small memorial in the bistro, inviting the townspeople to hear Eliza's story and clear her name. On the night of the memorial, as the last guests left and the bistro grew quiet, Lydia felt a sense of peace settle over the place. She walked to the mirror and saw Eliza's reflection once more. This time, the ghostly figure smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. Eliza's spirit was finally at rest. From that night on, the bistro was free of hauntings, and Lydia continued to run it with great success. But every now and then, when the wind howled outside and the rain lashed against the windows, Lydia could still hear the faint strains of an eerie lullaby, a gentle reminder of the ghost who once haunted Elm Street Bistro. The second story, The Haunted Diner, a true story. The Blue Ridge Diner had been a staple in the small town of Ridgeville for over 50 years. Located along a quiet stretch of highway, it was a favorite stop for truckers, travelers, and locals alike. But recently, the diner had become known for something far more sinister than its famous blueberry pie. It all started in early 2023 when the diner changed ownership. The new owner, Mark Thompson, was eager to revitalize the aging establishment. He hired a team to renovate the interior, aiming to blend its classic charm with a fresh, modern look. During the renovation, workers discovered an old, hidden room behind the kitchen wall. Inside, they found a collection of antique kitchen tools, a tattered cookbook, and a portrait of a stern-looking woman. Curious, Mark hung the portrait in the main dining area as a nod to the diner's history. The woman in the portrait was identified as Margaret Lawson, the diner's original owner. According to local legend, Margaret had been a formidable presence, known for her strict rules and unyielding demeanor. She had passed away under mysterious circumstances in the 1970s, and her death had never been fully explained. Shortly after the portrait was hung, strange occurrences began to plague the diner. Staff reported hearing footsteps in the empty kitchen, utensils moving on their own, and the faint sound of a woman humming an old tune. One night, as Mark was closing up, he saw a shadowy figure in the corner of the dining room. When he approached, it vanished, leaving a chilling cold in its wake. Customers also started experiencing unusual events. Plates would slide off tables, lights flickered without explanation, and several patrons claimed to have seen a ghostly figure near the portrait of Margaret. Word spread quickly, and the diner became the talk of the town, drawing both curious visitors and paranormal investigators. One evening, a group of investigators from a popular ghost hunting show arrived to film an episode at the diner. They set up cameras and recording equipment throughout the building, determined to capture evidence of the haunting. As the night progressed, they documented numerous unexplainable phenomena: doors opening and closing on their own, sudden temperature drops, and disembodied voices. The most chilling moment came when one of the investigators, a skeptic named Lisa, decided to address Margaret directly. Standing in front of the portrait, she asked, "Margaret, if you're here with us, can you give us a sign?" The room fell silent for a moment, and then the lights flickered violently. A loud crash echoed from the kitchen, and when they rushed in to investigate, they found the antique cookbook open to a page detailing a blueberry pie recipe, with the words, "Help me," scrawled in the margin. The discovery prompted Mark to delve deeper into the diner's history. He uncovered old newspaper articles suggesting that Margaret had been involved in a scandal just before her death. There were rumors of a poisoned pie served to a rival diner owner, though no evidence had ever been found. Mark speculated that Margaret's spirit might be trapped, seeking redemption or trying to reveal the truth about her demise. In a final attempt to lay Margaret's spirit to rest, Mark held a special memorial at the diner, inviting locals to share their memories and stories about Margaret. During the event, an elderly woman named Betty came forward with a revelation. Betty had been a young waitress at the diner in the 1970s and had witnessed Margaret's final days. According to Betty, Margaret had been framed by a jealous competitor. The poisoned pie had been a setup, and Margaret had taken the blame to protect someone she loved. With this new information, Mark organized a formal clearing of Margaret's name, publicly announcing the truth and dedicating a memorial plaque in her honor. That night, as the last guests left and the diner fell silent, Mark felt a profound sense of peace. The strange occurrences ceased, and the Blue Ridge Diner returned to its former glory, now known not only for its delicious food, but also for the tale of its haunted past and the spirit that had finally found rest. Third story: The Ghost of Harborview Cafe. Harborview Cafe was a quaint little eatery perched on the edge of the town's harbor. It was known for its cozy atmosphere, fresh seafood, and stunning views of the water. However, in the summer of 2024, the cafe became famous for something far more chilling: a series of ghostly encounters that left the staff and patrons alike shaken. The new owner, Jenna, had taken over the cafe earlier that year, hoping to breathe new life into the establishment. The building itself was old, dating back to the late 1800s, and had seen many owners over the decades. Despite its age, It had always been a beloved part of the community. Jenna's renovations focused on maintaining its historic charm while updating the facilities. Everything seemed to be going well until one night in July. Jenna was working late, going over inventory in the back office. The cafe was closed, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against the harbor wall. Suddenly, she heard a faint melody drifting through the air. It sounded like an old sea shanty, a song long forgotten by time. Curious and a bit unnerved, Jenna walked into the dining area, expecting to find that the music was coming from a passing boat. But as she stepped into the room, the singing stopped abruptly. The air grew cold, and she felt a presence behind her. Turning around, she saw nothing but the shadows cast by the dim light. The next day, Jenna mentioned the incident to her staff. To her surprise, several of them admitted to experiencing strange occurrences as well, plates moving on their own, cold spots in the kitchen, and the feeling of being watched. One of the servers, a young woman named Emily, claimed to have seen a figure dressed in old-fashioned sailor's attire standing by the window late one night. When she approached, the figure vanished into thin air. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Jenna began researching the cafe's history. She discovered that in the early 1900s, the building had been a boarding house for sailors. One of those sailors, a man named Thomas, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. According to local legend, Thomas had fallen in love with the boarding house owner's daughter, but their romance was doomed. He vanished one stormy night, never to be seen again, and it was rumored that his restless spirit still haunted the place. Intrigued, Jenna decided to hold a séance, hoping to communicate with Thomas and put his spirit to rest. She invited a local medium, a woman named Claire, who had a reputation for her abilities. One evening after closing, Jenna, Claire, and a few brave staff members gathered in the dining area, forming a circle around an old table. As Claire began to chant softly, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the table started to shake, and a cold wind blew through the closed windows. Claire's voice grew louder as she called out to Thomas, asking him to reveal himself. The room fell silent, and then they heard the faint sound of a sea shanty, just as Jenna had heard before. The medium's eyes rolled back, and she spoke in a voice that was not her own, recounting Thomas's story. He had been betrayed by a fellow sailor, who had stolen his love and his life. Thomas's spirit lingered, seeking closure and justice. Jenna and her team were determined to help Thomas find peace. They placed a memorial plaque in his honor by the harbor, recounting his story and acknowledging his tragic end. They also held a small ceremony, inviting the townspeople to join in remembering Thomas and the history of the cafe. From that night on, the haunting ceased. The cold spots, moving objects, and ghostly figures were no more. The Harborview Cafe continued to thrive, now with an added layer of history and intrigue that drew even more visitors. Jenna often told the tale of Thomas, the ghostly sailor, to anyone who asked, ensuring that his story was never forgotten and his spirit was finally at rest. In the heart of the picturesque town of Maplewood stood the Maplewood Restaurant, a beloved establishment known for its gourmet cuisine and historic charm. The restaurant was housed in an elegant Victorian building, once the home of a wealthy family in the late 1800s. After changing hands several times, it had become one of the town's premier dining spots. However, in the fall of 2024, the restaurant gained notoriety for a series of inexplicable and eerie events. The new head chef, Michael, was a renowned culinary artist, eager to make his mark at Maplewood. He had heard rumors about the restaurant's haunted history, but dismissed them as mere folklore. According to local legend, the spirit of a former chef named Henry haunted the kitchen. Henry had worked at the restaurant in the 1920s and was known for his fiery temper and perfectionism. One night, after a heated argument with the owner, Henry had tragically died in a mysterious kitchen fire. Michael's skepticism was soon put to the test. One evening, as he was prepping for the dinner service, he noticed a shadowy figure moving in the kitchen. Thinking it was one of his sous chefs, he called out, but there was no response. The figure disappeared into thin air, leaving Michael bewildered. He shrugged it off, attributing it to stress and exhaustion. But the strange occurrences didn't stop there. Pots and pans would clatter to the floor without explanation, ingredients would go missing, and cold spots would appear near the stove. The staff began to grow uneasy, especially when they heard disembodied whispers and felt an unseen presence watching them. One night, after closing, Michael decided to stay late and investigate. He had heard enough from his frightened staff and wanted to get to the bottom of the mystery. As he stood alone in the silent kitchen, he felt a sudden chill. The temperature dropped, and the air grew thick with tension. Michael heard the faint sound of a knife chopping on a cutting board. He turned around to see a ghostly figure in an old chef's uniform, busy at work. The apparition looked up, and their eyes met. Michael's blood ran cold. The ghostly chef's face was a mix of sorrow and anger. The figure raised a hand, pointing towards an old, dusty recipe book on a shelf. Michael approached cautiously, opening the book to find a page with a signature that read, Henry. In that moment, Michael understood. Henry's spirit was still tied to the restaurant, driven by a passion for his craft that death could not extinguish. Determined to honor Henry's legacy, Michael decided to recreate one of Henry's signature dishes, a classic beef Wellington, following the recipe to the letter. The next evening, Michael presented the dish to the staff and a few regular customers, explaining the story behind it. As they savored the perfectly cooked beef Wellington, the atmosphere in the restaurant seemed to lighten. The sense of unease lifted, and the kitchen felt warmer, more inviting. From that night on, the haunting ceased. The kitchen became a place of harmony and creativity once more. Michael made it a tradition to include one of Henry's recipes on the menu each month, paying tribute to the phantom chef who had once ruled the kitchen with an iron fist and a passionate heart. The Maplewood restaurant thrived, not just as a place of fine dining, but as a symbol of respect for the past and the culinary artistry that transcended time. Michael often told the story of Henry to new staff and curious patrons, ensuring that the legacy of the phantom chef lived on, and his spirit found peace in the kitchen he loved so dearly. Fifth story, The Haunted Pizzeria, a tale of restless spirits. In the bustling city of New Haven, there stood an old pizzeria called Antonio's, famous for its authentic Italian pizzas and warm, family-friendly atmosphere. The pizzeria had been run by the DeMarco family for generations, with recipes passed down from their ancestors in Italy. But in the winter of 2023, Antonio's became known for something far more chilling than its delicious margherita pizza. Marco DeMarco, the current owner, had recently taken over the pizzeria from his father. Marco was passionate about keeping the family traditions alive, but he was also keen on modernizing the place. During a renovation project to expand the dining area, workers discovered a hidden cellar beneath the building. The cellar was filled with old wine barrels, dusty furniture, and a strange collection of antique dolls. The discovery excited Marco, who thought the cellar could be a unique feature to attract customers. However, as soon as the cellar was opened, strange things began to happen. The pizzeria staff reported hearing whispers and laughter coming from the cellar, even when it was empty. Pizza ingredients would go missing or be moved to strange places, and the temperature would drop suddenly, leaving a frosty chill in the air. One evening, after closing, Marco decided to investigate the cellar himself. Armed with a flashlight, he descended the creaky wooden stairs into the darkness. The air was damp and cold, and the faint smell of mold lingered. As Marco explored, he heard the unmistakable sound of children giggling. He shone his flashlight around but saw nothing. Then, in the beam of the flashlight, he noticed one of the dolls had moved. It was now sitting upright, staring directly at him with its glassy eyes. Startled, Marco quickly left the cellar and locked it up. The next day, he confided in his grandmother, Nonna Lucia, who had grown up in the building. Nonna Lucia's face turned pale as Marco described the events. She told him a story she had never shared before. Many years ago, the building had been a boarding house run by a woman named Isabella, who took in orphans during the early 1900s. Isabella was kind but strict, and she cared deeply for the children. Tragically, one winter night, a fire broke out in the boarding house. Despite Isabella's efforts, several children perished in the blaze, along with Isabella herself. The cellar, which had been their playroom, was sealed off, and the building was eventually converted into a pizzeria by Marco's great-grandfather. Nonna Lucia believed that the spirits of Isabella and the children were still trapped in the cellar, their souls restless and longing for peace. Marco, moved by the tragic story, decided to hold a memorial for the lost souls. He invited a local priest to bless the building and held a small ceremony, inviting the community to pay their respects. During the memorial, Marco placed flowers and toys in the cellar, hoping to bring comfort to the spirits. He also dedicated a special pizza on the menu to Isabella and the children, donating a portion of the proceeds to local orphanages. After the memorial, the strange occurrences ceased. The whispers and laughter faded, and the temperature in the pizzeria returned to normal. The cellar, once a place of fear, became a quiet, peaceful space. Antonio's thrived once more, not just as a place for great pizza, but as a testament to the power of remembering and honoring the past. Marco often shared the story of Isabella and the children with his customers, reminding them of the history that lay beneath their feet. The haunted pizzeria became a place where the past and present coexisted, and the spirits of Isabella and the children finally found the peace they had longed for.